A dense fog clings to the silent Norse landscape, hiding secrets in the deep valleys. We all know the Vikings dreamed of Valhalla, but what if they also built doors to the underworld right here on Earth? In their world, realms like Helheim and Niflheim were not just distant myths but tangible places of ice and shadow. This journey uncovers the physical evidence scattered across Scandinavia that points to a stunning possibility. By the end, you will see the ancient Norse map in a completely new way, tracing a network of real-world locations believed to be direct links to the land of the dead. We will explore why a queen was buried with a ceremonial cart meant for otherworldly travel, and what message was carved into runes to keep the dead from returning. What do you believe lies just beneath the surface of our world? The underworld was not a single, waiting darkness but a layered realm of distinct and chilling domain. While Valhalla promised eternal glory for the fallen warrior, the fate awaiting most souls was far more complex and somber. The most well-known of these realms was Helheim, a vast, misty hall ruled by the goddess Hel, a figure who was herself half-living woman and half-decaying corpse. This was the destination for those who died of sickness or simply old age, a quiet and often grim reflection of a life's natural end. Yet beneath even this hall lay something older and far more terrifying: Niflheim. This was the primordial world of ice, mist, and crushing darkness, a chaotic landscape that existed before the gods themselves. Here, the great dragon Nidhöggr, whose name means malice striker, perpetually gnaws at the roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, a constant assault on the very foundation of existence. This is why these underworld realms were so deeply feared. Valhalla was a reward, but Helheim and Niflheim represented the cold, inevitable return to the primal elements, a final stillness that even the bravest warrior might not escape. This profound belief in a tangible, multi-layered land of the dead is what compelled the Norse to mark our world with gateways to reach it. These chilling beliefs found their most haunting expression not in grand tombs, but in the quiet, waterlogged depths of the peat bogs. Across Denmark and northern Germany, hundreds of bodies have been unearthed from these wetlands, their features so perfectly preserved after 2,000 years that we can still see the stubble on a man's chin or the delicate braid in a woman's hair. The Toland man was discovered with a rope still tight around his neck, his face settled into an expression of serene peace. The Gråbøl man's throat was cut from ear to ear. These were not casual burials, they were ritual killings, deliberate acts of violence that sent these individuals into the bog with immense purpose. Why choose such a place? The ancient Norse saw bogs as liminal spaces, a threshold between the solid world of the living and the fluid, hidden world of the dead. They are neither fully land nor fully water, but something in between, making them the perfect natural portal. The theory is that these people, and the countless valuable objects also tossed into the mire, were offerings sent directly through this gateway. They were gifts intended for powerful beings of the underworld, perhaps for the Vanir gods associated with fertility and the land, or a direct plea to the goddess Hel herself. By depositing a life into this transitional ooze, the community sought to appease these forces, to ask for protection, or to ensure a good harvest, believing the sacrifice would travel through the mud and bone, straight into the hands of the deities waiting on the other side. The silent, sacrificial bogs reveal a direct and terrifying link to the underworld, but another kind of gateway was built for royalty. In the year 1904, farmers in Norway uncovered a site that would rewrite history. Buried within a massive mound of blue clay was an entire Viking ship, an 80-foot-long vessel with a towering, spiraled prow, so ornately carved it seemed more a work of art than a seaworthy craft. This was the Oseberg ship, a floating palace intended for a one-way journey. Inside the burial chamber lay the skeletons of two women. One was elderly, perhaps in her 70s or 80s, a remarkable age for the time. The other was younger, likely in her 50s. they were surrounded by a king's ransom engraved goods, from richly woven tapestries and downy beds to iron-bound chests and farming tools. But the most peculiar items were the vehicles: a ceremonial wagon, 4 elaborate sleighs, and even the skeletons of more than a dozen horses were all crammed into the ship's hold. Why would a queen, for she was surely of the highest rank, need so many ways to travel in the afterlife? The identity of the two women has fueled debate for a century. The elder is widely believed to be a powerful queen, perhaps from the nearby region of Vestfold. The younger woman, however, presents a deeper mystery. Analysis of her bones suggests she lived a life of hard labor, a stark contrast to the aristocratic elder. Was she a loyal slave, a trusted companion, or perhaps a Völva, a sorceress whose knowledge of the spirit world was essential for the journey ahead? This leads to the most compelling theory about the Oseberg burial. The sheer presence of the sleighs and the wagon points not to Valhalla, a warrior's hall reached by sea, but to an overland trek. In Norse mythology, the path to Helheim was a long, difficult road that required specific means of conveyance. The entire burial, from the ship itself to the smallest kitchen utensil, may have been a meticulously staged ritual. Its purpose was not to celebrate a glorious death in battle, but to ensure a powerful and protected passage for this queen into the cold embrace of Hell's domain, equipped with everything she would need to complete her final terrestrial voyage into the land of the dead. Among the sleighs and chests packed into the Oseberg ship, one object stands out for its sheer strangeness: a beautifully crafted wooden cart. This was no farm wagon. Its 4 wheels were designed to turn, its body was a hollowed-out space, and every inch of its surface was covered in breathtaking, complex carvings. Fierce warriors lock in combat, serpents coil around the edges, and repeated images of cats, perhaps even the great beast that pulls the chariot of the goddess Freyja, march along its sides. These are not just decorations, they are a visual story, a symbolic map of the otherworld. The cart itself is far too fragile and ornate for any practical use on the rough roads of the Viking Age. Its wood is thin, its axles delicate. This was not built for the world of the living. Scholars believe this cart served a single, profound purpose: to act as a sole chariot for the queen's final journey. Norse mythology describes the road to Helheim as a long, difficult, and mist-shrouded path, a terrain impossible to traverse on foot. The soul needed a vehicle, a protected vessel to carry it through that spectral landscape. This ornate cart, then, becomes a physical key to a metaphysical realm. It was the queen's private carriage for the underworld, a guarantee that she would not have to walk the chilling road into eternity, but could ride in the state befitting her rank directly into the halls of the goddess Hel. But the queen's ship was just one type of gateway. All across the Norse landscape, the living built homes for the dead. These were the burial mounds, or hauga, man-made hills of earth and stone that rose from the fields like permanent dwellings. To the Norse, these were not simply graves where a body was laid to rest. They were the actual houses where the dead continued their existence, a belief that transformed the entire countryside into a populated neighborhood of the departed. The soul did not simply vanish into a distant underworld. It moved next door into a mound that was seen as both a tomb and a living residence. This was a two-way street, a thin boundary that could be crossed. The most feared occupant of these mounds was the Draugr, a powerful and malevolent undead being. Unlike a ghost, a Draugr possessed a physical, supernaturally strong body that remained in its mound, often guarding the treasure buried with it. These creatures were not mindless. They were willful, vengeful, and could leave their mounds to haunt the living, causing storms, attacking livestock, or even returning to their old farms to wreak havoc on their families. This profound fear meant that every burial mound was treated as an active portal. It was a door that could, and sometimes did, swing both ways. This is why so many rituals were performed at the time of burial, all designed to ensure the dead remained content and, most importantly, inside their new home. A corpse might be bound with ropes or have its feet cut off to prevent it from walking. Weapons were sometimes placed in the grave in a way that trapped the spirit, and large stones, known as nightmare stones, could be laid on the chest of the deceased to pin them down. The community lived in a state of respectful vigilance, making offerings of food and drink at the mounds to keep the powerful occupants pacified, forever negotiating with the thin soil that separated their world from the one just beneath their feet. Rising from the flat Swedish plains, 3 colossal burial mounds dominate the skyline at Gamla Uppsala. These are not the simple hillocks of common folk. They are the royal mounds, each one a man-made mountain of earth so vast it could only have been built for a king. For centuries before the Vikings, this site was the beating heart of Scandinavia, a place where kings were chosen, gods were worshipped, and the veil between worlds was at its absolute thinnest. The sheer scale of the place is staggering. The largest of the 3 mounds is over 60 feet high and 200 feet across, a construction project that would have required thousands of workers for an entire generation. This was not just a graveyard, it was a statement of divine power carved into the very earth. Inside these monumental earthworks, archaeologists have found the cremated remains of rulers, their ashes mingled with the burnt bones of sacrificed animals and fragments of exquisite gaming pieces, a symbol of strategic power that would follow them into the next life. But why build here? Why concentrate such immense royal power in this specific location? The answer lies in what was already there. Gamla Uppsala was already an ancient and sacred site, a place of immense spiritual energy long before the first king was laid to rest. It was the center of the old pagan religion, home to a legendary temple dedicated to the gods Odin, Thor, and Frey. The site itself was believed to be a nexus of supernatural forces. By building their monumental tombs here, the kings of the Ungling dynasty were doing something brilliant and terrifying. They were physically anchoring their lineage to this sacred ground. They were not just burying their dead, they were plugging their entire royal bloodline directly into the source of ancestral power. Each mound was a conduit, a direct line to the underworld and the wisdom of the ancestors who resided there. This connection gave the living king an unshakable authority. His right to rule was not just inherited, it was divinely sanctioned and actively supported by the powerful dead sleeping just beneath the soil. He could literally point to the massive mounds and say his power flowed from them, that he ruled with the blessing of his forefathers and the gods of the earth itself. The mounds were his dynasty's permanent, unassailable claim to the throne, a doorway to the underworld that kept his family in power for centuries. While kings slept in their royal mounds, the living carved their warnings and wishes into stone for all to see. Scattered across the Scandinavian landscape, rune stones stand as silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with the angular script of the Old Norse language. Most were raised as memorials, simple declarations like Kjarthi placed this stone in memory of his son Bui. They were the billboards of the Viking age, honoring the dead and marking the claims of the living. But some stones hold far darker messages, inscriptions that reveal a deep and chilling fear that the stone itself was not just a marker, but an active conduit to the soul resting below. The Björketorp runestone in Sweden stands utterly alone in a field, a massive, freestanding monolith. Its runes do not memorialize a person. Instead, they issue a dire and powerful curse. Part of the inscription reads, "I foresee perdition for the one who breaks this monument. I promise destruction to the one who shatters this stone." This was not an empty threat. The Norse believed that the runic alphabet itself, the Futhok, was a divine gift from the god Odin, who had sacrificed himself upon the world tree to gain its secrets. Each rune was more than a letter. It was a vessel of immense magical power. To carve a curse into a rune stone was to activate that power, to weave a spell of protection that was as real and tangible as the stone itself. The stone became a seal, a magical lock on the burial ground meant to trap the dead within and punish any living soul foolish enough to disturb it. This fear was intensely personal. Another stone from Denmark carries a plea directly aimed at the departed. It reads, "Thorir raised this stone in memory of Thorn, Jodger, his son. May Thor hallow these runes. May he who shattered this stone or he who drags it away in order to invoke a troll become a revenant himself." The message is stunningly clear. The person who damages this stone will not just be cursed. They will be transformed into a revenant, a walking corpse, one of the restless dead. The runes here are not just a memorial. They are a direct invocation, a prayer to the god Thor to imbue the stone with a specific, terrifying magic that turns the aggressor into the very monster they risked awakening. This was the ultimate deterrent, born from the belief that the rune stone was the point of contact, the mailbox to the underworld where such a dreadful fate could be arranged. Far to the west, in the volcanic heart of Iceland, another kind of gateway emerges from the earth. The Althing, the world's oldest parliamentary assembly, was founded at a place called Thingvellir, a name that literally means Parliament Plains. But this was no ordinary meeting ground. The site is a breathtaking rift valley, a colossal tear in the planet's crust where the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates are slowly, inexorably pulling apart. Towering cliffs flank a vast plain, and running through its center is a deep, raw fissure. This is a landscape of profound division, a place literally caught between two worlds. For centuries, we have celebrated the Althing as a milestone of human governance, where chieftains gathered to debate and codify their laws. Yet the choice of this specific, geologically dramatic location was no accident. Why hold the most important gathering of the year in such a rugged, remote place? The answer may lie not in politics, but in the spirit world. The Norse viewed any liminal space, any threshold between two states, as a place of immense power. The shoreline between land and sea, the bog between earth and water, and here at Thingvellir, the cliff wall between the high ground and the low, and the fissure between what is above and what is below. This was the ultimate liminal zone. It is a compelling theory that the chieftains chose Thingvellir precisely because they believed the veil was thin here. The great fissure, that wound in the world, was not just a crack in the rock. It was potentially a direct conduit to the underworld. When the law speaker recited the entire legal code from the law rock, his voice echoing between the cliffs, he was not just addressing the living. He was performing a sacred act, announcing the laws of men in a place where they could be heard and ratified by the ancestors sleeping deep within the land. The new laws, forged through debate and consensus on this plane, were being delivered into the earth itself for approval, connecting the rule of the living with the timeless wisdom of the dead. This transforms the Althing from a mere political body into a spiritual ceremony where human justice was grounded in the very bones of the world. While the Althing channeled power from a crack in the earth, another kind of gateway rose toward the sky. In Iceland, certain mountains were not just landmarks, they were living, breathing parts of the afterlife, and none was more famous than Helgafell, the holy mountain. The belief here was beautifully specific and deeply local. For the people who lived in its shadow, when a loved one died a good and peaceful death, their soul might not travel to the distant, misty halls of hell or the noisy feasts of Valhalla. Instead, they would simply walk into the side of the mountain. The physical rock would open up for them, revealing a vast, well-lit hall inside, a great feasting chamber where all the ancestors of the community were already gathered, alive and well, continuing their lives in joy and merriment. Imagine looking up at the familiar slope you saw every day, knowing your grandfather and your great-grandmother were inside, sharing stories and laughter, forever a part of the very land you farmed. This was a profoundly comforting belief. It kept the dead close, transforming grief into a sense of continuous, visible presence. The mountain was not a cold tomb. It was a warm, lit house, its doors invisible to the living but always open to the worthy dead. There are accounts of locals who claim to have seen this spectacle firsthand. They would report seeing flickering lights from within the stone, or even hearing the distant, muffled sounds of celebration and clinking drinking horns echoing from the mountain's heart on a still night. Helgafell was not a symbol of the underworld. It was the underworld's front door, a real, tangible, geographic entrance to a paradise reserved solely for their own. This belief created a sacred geography where the boundary between life and death was as solid as rock and as thin as a shadow. The mountain stood as a permanent, reassuring monument, a piece of the afterlife made visible, offering a promise that the final journey was not into a cold unknown, but into the warm, familiar heart of home. Yet even the comforting warmth of Helgafell had its chilling opposite. Beneath the surface of the earth lay a network of natural tunnels and caverns, places where the Norse believed one could literally walk into the underworld. Caves were not just shelters, they were the deepest and most tangible portals of all, their gaping mouths leading straight into the realms of giants, dwarves, and the dead. In Iceland, one cave carries the name of a being who would one day destroy the world, Surtr, the Cave of Surtr. This massive lava tube was formed by the very fires of the earth, a fitting home for the mythic fire giant who will wield his flaming sword at the world's end. To even approach this black opening in the volcanic rock was to stand at the threshold of apocalyptic power, but it was not merely a place of fear, it was a place of ritual. Inside Surtr, archaeologists have uncovered a stunning assembly of artifacts deliberately placed in the darkness. The bones of sheep and cattle, carefully arranged, speak of sacrifices made deep within the mountain. More hauntingly, they found small, crafted items and pieces of jewelry, offerings left in the profound silence far from the sun. Why bring valuables into such a dangerous and lightless place? The answer lies in how the Norse perceived the cave itself. Its darkness was not mere absence of light, it was the primal darkness of creation. Its depth was a journey downward, following a physical path that mirrored the descent into Niflheim. The strange, echoing acoustics that warp a whisper into a chorus of disembodied voices made it feel truly alive, a place where one could hear the mutterings of the earth. This combination made the cave the perfect symbolic representation of the earth's womb. Just as life emerges from a womb, so too did the Norse believe that the land of the dead and the powerful beings who inhabited it could be accessed through this same kind of opening. By venturing inside to perform their rituals, they were entering the generative core of the world, a place where the boundaries were so thin that a gift left there could pass directly into the hands of a dwarf, the hall of a giant, or the cold shores of Helheim itself. This was religion in its most physical form, a journey into the belly of the earth to commune with the forces that governed life and death. The deepest gateways were not always found in mountains or caves, but in the still, dark water of a well. In the shadow of the world tree Yggdrasil, one of its three great roots plunged into a place more profound than any earthly location, the Well of Erd. This was no simple pool of water. It was the sacred well of fate itself, a cosmic spring where the past, present, and future swirled together in its depths. Here lived the Norns, three powerful female beings who were the shapers of destiny. They were not goddesses, but ancient, elemental forces. Every day they drew water from the well, mixing it with sacred sand to water the roots of Yggdrasil, healing the wounds inflicted by the dragon Nidhogg and preserving the balance of all creation. In doing so, they were also weaving the threads of every life, from the lowest farmer to the highest god. The water they drew was the substance of fate, and the well was its source, a place intrinsically connected to the underworld domains that lay along the world tree's other roots. This was where all destinies were ultimately written and fulfilled. While no mortal could journey to this mythical well, its power echoed throughout the Norse world. Countless natural springs bubbling up from the ground were seen as its earthly reflections, tiny mirrors of that great cosmic source. These were not just sources of fresh water. They were portals to understanding. People would travel to these revered springs, often leaving offerings of coins, jewelry, or finely woven cloth. They were not praying for rain or a good harvest, but for a glimpse into the tapestry of their own lives. By peering into the placid, dark water of a sacred spring, one might hope to see a ripple of the future, a sign from the Norns themselves. To cast an offering into its depths was to send a plea directly into the earth, a request to the weavers of fate to look kindly upon your thread. This transformed the entire landscape into a network of oracles. Every silent pool held the potential to connect a person directly to the mechanisms of destiny, linking the world of the living to the timeless underworld wisdom of the Well of Erd. The path to the underworld was not always a one-way journey for the dead. Sometimes its chaotic power was deliberately summoned into the world of the living through the bodies of the most feared warriors of the Norse world, the berserkers. These were not merely skilled fighters, they were conduits for a primal rage known as the Berserker Gang, a battle fury so complete it seemed to transform a man into something more, or perhaps less than human. Historical accounts describe them foaming at the mouth, howling like beasts, and biting the rims of their shields, immune to fire and steel until the madness passed. This was far more than adrenaline or battle lust. Many scholars now believe this state was a form of profound spiritual possession. The warrior did not merely act like a wolf or a bear. He invited the spirit of the animal, a raw, predatory force from the wild edges of the world, to inhabit his very being. But there is a darker, more chilling possibility. What if the force entering the warrior was not a simple animal spirit, but something far older and more malevolent, a vengeful spirit or draugr summoned from the underworld itself? This would explain the absolute, self-destructive fury, a chaos that harmed friend and foe alike. To become such a vessel required a sacred and terrifying ritual. These transformations were not triggered on the battlefield. They were prepared for in remote, liminal spaces far from the village. A warrior seeking this power would retreat alone into the deep forest, a place neither fully tame nor fully wild, or descend into a cave like Circular, a known gateway to the realms below. There, in the profound silence and darkness, he would perform ceremonies to open a temporary gateway within himself. Through chants, perhaps the consumption of specific psychoactive plants, and sheer force of will, he would thin the veil, offering his body as a door. He was not praying for strength, he was screaming an invitation into the void, begging for a fragment of the underworld's chaos to flow into him. For the duration of the battle, he became a temporary, living portal, a weaponized crack in reality. The Berserker was both the invoker and the sacrifice, a man who risked his very soul to channel the destructive forces of the afterlife for a fleeting moment of absolute power on the field of war. But the most haunting vessels were not made of wood but of stone. Scattered across the coasts of Scandinavia, you can still walk among the outlines of great ships that were never meant to touch the water. These are the stone ship settings, ancient monuments where hundreds of standing stones were carefully placed to form the perfect silhouette of a Viking longship, sometimes over 100 feet from prow to stern. At sites like Annons Mound in Sweden, these stone fleets stretch across the landscape in a silent, breathtaking armada. They were almost always built around a central burial, a grave placed right where the mast would be on a real ship. This connection to death is undeniable, but the choice of stone tells a deeper story. A wooden ship like the one at Oseberg could be launched into the earth, sent on a voyage to another realm. A stone ship, however, is permanently anchored. It cannot sail anywhere. So what was its purpose? The prevailing theory is that these were not vehicles for the initial journey to the afterlife. That first trip was over. The soul had already arrived in the underworld. The stone ship was its conveyance for the travels that came next. The Norse underworld was not a single, static place, but a landscape of different domains, of long roads and misty rivers that the spirit needed to navigate. The stone ship was a permanent, indestructible vessel provided for that eternal, internal journey. It was a sole boat for the afterlife itself, ensuring the deceased would never be stranded or lost in the complexities of the world of the dead. Yet there is another, more protective interpretation. By building a ship of immovable stone directly over the grave, the community may have been creating a spiritual container. The ship's outline, a powerful symbol of journey and transition, could also act as a sacred fence, a boundary that held the spirit within its designated place. It granted the dead a vessel for their afterlife travels while simultaneously ensuring that vessel could not sail back into the world of the living. It was a final gift and a final safeguard, a ship that offered infinite journey within the underworld but was forever moored to its shore. The silent, anchored ships of stone gave the dead a vessel for eternity, but the living sought a more dynamic path to the underworld, one that flowed right past their doors. Rivers were the lifeblood of the Norse world, yet their constant one-way current held a darker, more compelling symbolism. They were the perfect natural metaphor for a journey with no return. Nowhere is this connection more potent than at the Seidr River in Uppsala, Sweden, a waterway that snakes through the very heart of Norse sacred power. It flows directly between the site of the great pagan temple and the three colossal royal mounds, as if connecting the seat of the gods to the homes of the dead. Historical accounts and archaeological finds confirm this river was not just a geographical feature. It was a sacred conduit. For generations, people came to its banks to deposit a fortune in weapons, tools, and finely crafted jewelry into its depths. These were not careless losses, they were intentional, ritual offerings cast into the current. Why choose a river over solid ground? The answer lies in the nature of the water itself. A bog was a still, waiting portal, but a river was an active, carrying force. The Norse would have seen the objects vanish beneath the surface and travel downstream, never to be seen again. This was not a gift left at a doorstep, it was a gift sent on a journey. The logic is inescapable. The flowing water was perceived as a one-way path, a direct and irreversible route to the realm of Hell. Just as the mythical river Styx formed the boundary of the Greek underworld, the Seidr River was likely seen as a tangible, local version of those cosmic currents. To drop a sword or a golden ring into its waters was to entrust it to the current's care, believing the river would physically carry the offering downstream and downward, through the soil and into the hands of the deities and ancestors residing in the land of the dead. This transforms every sunken spearhead from a mere sacrifice into a mailed message, a transaction with the underworld delivered by the only postal service guaranteed to reach its destination. The sacred rivers and stone ships reveal a landscape deeply connected to the afterlife, but some individuals sought not just to send gifts to the underworld, but to journey there themselves. This was the domain of Seidr magic, a powerful form of Norse sorcery practiced almost exclusively by women known as völvur. Seidr was not about casting fireballs or summoning storms. It was a subtle, profound art of weaving fate itself. A völva would enter a deep, self-induced trance, a state of altered consciousness that allowed her spirit to slip its earthly bonds. In this state, she could travel across the invisible threads that connected the 9 worlds, walking in realms inaccessible to the living. Her primary purpose was to see the future, to discern the patterns the Norns had woven, and at times to gently reshape them. But the most daunting of her spiritual voyages was the descent into the underworld. She would journey to the misty halls of Helheim to commune directly with the dead, seeking their wisdom to heal a sickness, resolve a feud, or reveal a hidden truth to the living. This was not a metaphorical journey. It was believed to be a real, perilous trek of the soul. To perform such a delicate and dangerous working, a völva required a specific kind of place. She sought out locations where the veil between worlds was already thin and tattered. These magical hotspots were often marked by unusual natural formations. A single, massive glacial erratic sitting alone in a field, a grove of strangely twisted trees, or a quiet clearing right beside an ancient burial mound could all serve as her sacred studio. It was at these liminal points that she would set up her high seat, a special platform from which she would work her magic. Seated there, with the bones of the ancestors just feet away in the mound, Her chants and rituals were believed to pull at the fabric of reality, thinning the veil until she could simply step through. In these quiet, charged places, the Völva was not just a fortune teller. She was a living bridge, a traveler whose spirit could walk the cold roads of hell and return to report what she had learned, weaving a direct line of communication between the living community and the powerful dead who watched over them. At the very center of this sacred landscape stood a structure so potent it was considered the axis of the Norse world. The temple at Uppsala, as described by the chronicler Adam of Bremen, was not merely a building. It was a colossal engine of belief, a place where the gods, the living, and the dead converged. He wrote of a temple entirely covered in gold, a dazzling beacon that would have been visible for miles across the flat plain. Suspended above its roof was a massive golden chain, a symbol whose meaning was both literal and profound. This chain did not merely decorate the temple. It physically connected the structure to the heavens, a gleaming tether binding the world of men to the divine realm of Asgard itself. Inside, the air thick with the smoke of sacrificial fires, stood three immense idols. Thor, the protector of mankind, occupied the central throne, flanked by Odin, the All-Father and Lord of the Slain, and Frey, the god of fertility and peace. This triad represented the complete cycle of Norse life, from the security Thor provided, to the sovereignty Odin demanded, to the abundance Frey bestowed. But the rituals performed here reveal a far darker purpose. Every 9 years, a great festival convened at this spot, a gathering of such importance that every person in Sweden was expected to attend. This was not a casual celebration. It was a vital act of cosmic maintenance. For 9 days, a relentless series of sacrifices unfolded. The blood of every living creature was offered, from horses and dogs to men. Adam of Bremen chillingly notes that the bodies of the sacrificed were hung in a sacred grove adjacent to the temple, a grove where every tree was considered divine precisely because it was fed by the blood of the dead. Why such a horrific spectacle? The Norse believed that the universe was a fragile construct perpetually threatened by chaos. The temple, with its golden chain and powerful idols, was the central hub holding the 9 worlds in balance. It was the ultimate nexus, the single point where the power of Asgard, the reality of Midgard, and the silence of Helheim all intersected. This connection, however, required constant fuel. The sacrifices, especially those human lives offered every 9th year, were not acts of random cruelty. They were the brutal, necessary payment to keep the cosmic machinery running. The blood soaking into the earth at Uppsala was the price for keeping the golden chain from breaking, for ensuring the gods remained attentive, and for preventing the underworld from spilling its shadows into the world of the living. It was here, more than anywhere else, that the Norse demonstrated just how thin and how costly they believed the veil between worlds truly was. The ground itself seems to breathe in Iceland, a low rumble vibrating deep beneath your feet. While the mountain Helgafell offered a comforting doorway for the dead, other openings in the earth promised a far more violent destination. Across this stark landscape, volcanic vents spew steam and boiling mud into the air, and vast lava fields stretch like a blackened sea of frozen stone. To the Norse, these were not random geological features. They were the smoking breath of Muspelheim, the primordial world of fire that existed at the southern edge of creation. This was not the cold, misty realm of hell. Muspelheim was a domain of pure, chaotic flame, a crucible of destruction ruled by the fire giant Seidr, who waits with a blazing sword for the final battle of Ragnarok. Every hissing fumarole, every bubbling hot spring, was seen as a literal crack in the fabric of Midgard, a place where the foundational fire of that other world was leaking through. Imagine standing before a geyser as it erupts, a tower of superheated water and steam tearing into the sky. You would not see a natural wonder. You would witness a temporary rupture, a glimpse into a realm of raw, untamed power that predated the gods themselves. These sights inspired a unique blend of awe and absolute terror. They were not portals for the dead to travel through, but pressure valves for a cosmic force that could, and one day would, consume everything. The earth here was not a solid, reliable foundation. It was a thin crust over a divine furnace, and its fiery exhalations were a constant, thunderous reminder that the end of the world was already simmering just below the surface. The dragon Nidhöggr was not a distant legend but a constant, gnawing reality. This serpent of pure malice lived beneath the world tree, perpetually chewing at its roots, and his presence was felt everywhere. You could see his domain in the deep, shadowed forests where the ground was a tangled mat of roots, a chaotic web of wood and earth that seemed to writhe with a life of its own. These were not just woods, they were a physical echo of the Underworld's foundation, a place where the order of the world above gave way to a primeval struggle for survival. The Norse saw this serpent in the gnarled oak root that broke their plow, in the sinkhole that suddenly opened in a field, and in the dark, damp spaces beneath the great trees they held sacred. Even their art was infused with his image. Remember the intricate carvings on the Oseberg cart. The serpents that coil around its edges are not merely decorative. They are Nidhöggr's kin, a visual reminder that the same destructive force threatening the cosmic tree also surrounded the queen on her journey into the afterlife. This belief transformed the very soil under their feet into something alive and menacing. Every forest root and every stone carving served as a stark daily warning. The universe was not a stable, permanent place. It was a living system under perpetual assault from a force of pure chaos, a dragon whose endless hunger threatened to one day bring the entire world crashing down. Just a few decades after the Oseberg discovery, another ship emerged from the blue clay of Norway. The Gokstad ship was a different kind of vessel entirely. Where the Oseberg ship was a graceful, ornate pleasure craft, the Gokstad ship was a true ocean-going warship nearly 80 feet long, built for speed and battle. It was a vessel designed to dominate the seas, and its occupant was every bit as formidable. Within the burial chamber lay the skeleton of a powerfully built man in his 40s. His bones told a story of a hard, physical life, with marks of old combat injuries and evidence of a fatal blade wound. This was no retired queen surrounded by domestic comforts. This was a chieftain, a warrior in his prime, laid to rest with a fleet of 3 smaller boats, 12 horses, and 6 dogs. The contrast to the Oseberg burial is stark and deliberate. The Oseberg queen was equipped for an overland trek with her sleighs and wagon, a clear signal pointing toward the road to Helheim, but the Gokstad chieftain was surrounded by the tools of a seafaring warrior. His grave goods included a gaming board, a symbol of strategic thought, but lacked the overtly magical or domestic items found with the women. So where was this powerful man destined to go? Was his ship meant to sail straight to Valhalla, where Odin's chosen warriors feast and fight for eternity? Or was he, like the queen, bound for the quieter, colder halls of hell? The evidence is beautifully contradictory, suggesting a fascinating possibility. Perhaps his people did not choose one destination over the other. Perhaps they equipped him for both. The ship itself, a weapon of war, is a perfect vessel for a journey to the warrior's paradise. The presence of his hunting dogs and horses could support that vision, companions for the eternal hunt. Yet, the very act of burying him in a ship within a mound also connects him to the earth, to the underworld journey that leads to hell. There were no sleighs for an overland trek, but the ship itself, sealed in the ground, becomes a permanent vessel for navigating the rivers and misty shores of the dead. This ambiguity may have been entirely intentional. The Norse afterlife was not a simple, one-size-fits-all system. A man of this chieftain status, a leader both in battle and in peace, may have been seen as having a complex spiritual destiny. His community might have believed he deserved a place in Valhalla, yet also needed to make the journey to join his ancestors in the underworld. By providing him with the tools for both a glorious feast and a shadowy voyage, they were covering all the possibilities. They were sending their leader into the unknown with a full passport, equipped to claim his rightful place in whichever realm would have him, ensuring his power and favor would continue to flow back to them from beyond the grave. Then the new faith arrived with its own sacred book and its own terrifying underworld. As Christianity spread across Scandinavia, a profound and deliberate transformation began to reshape the ancient landscape. The old pagan gateways were not simply abandoned, they were systematically repurposed. Across the region, you can see a startling pattern. A small, whitewashed church standing completely alone in a field, its foundations planted directly on the summit of a massive, pre-existing burial mound. This was not a coincidence of convenient geography. It was a calculated act of spiritual conquest. By building a church on top of a known pagan portal, the new religious authorities were performing a powerful form of magic in its own right. They were sanctifying a place already considered holy, but in their terms. The church's foundation stones became a holy seal, a permanent cork driven into the mouth of the old underworld gateway, redirecting its spiritual power toward the Christian God and forever blocking the path to Helheim. The stone and mortar were a declaration that the old ways were closed, their power subsumed by the cross. Yet the old beliefs did not vanish. They simply adapted, merging with the new doctrine in a process called syncretism. The Christian concept of hell, a place of eternal fire and punishment, was forcefully mapped onto the existing Norse understanding of Helheim, but there was a fundamental mismatch. Helheim was largely a place of cold, quiet rest, not fiery torment. This created a confusing, layered underworld in the popular imagination. The name Hell itself began to shift, becoming the word for the Christian hell in modern Scandinavian languages, even as its original, colder nature lingered in folklore. And the spirits of the Mounds refused to be silenced. The Draugr, the vengeful undead being of the Norse tradition, did not disappear when the church was built. Its legend evolved, often merging with the Christian demon or the generic ghost. For centuries after the conversion, local stories persisted of haunted mounds and churchyards, of restless figures seen near these ancient sites. People still spoke of the dangerous spirit that would protect its grave, a clear echo of the pagan Draugr, now warned against by a Christian priest. This enduring fear proves one thing. The power of these locations was not in the name of the god worshipped there, but in the place itself. The community's deep-seated memory, passed down through generations, insisted that this particular hill, this specific crack in the earth, was a connection to the other side. The new religion could build its churches and preach its sermons, but it could not erase the primal understanding that some places are simply thinner than others, and that the door between the living and the dead, once opened, is never fully closed. The secrets of the Norse underworld are no longer buried beyond reach. Modern archaeologists are now listening to the earth itself, using technologies that let them see through soil and stone. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the ground, painting a picture of hidden post holes and the ghostly outlines of long-vanished halls. From above, LIDAR scans strip away the dense canopy of Scandinavian forests, revealing the subtle, human-made contours of the land that have been hidden for 1,000 years. These tools are not just finding new sites, they are completely remapping the sacred geography around known locations like Gamla Uppsala. What was once thought to be a handful of royal mounds is now understood to be part of a vast, sprawling complex of smaller burials, processional roads, and ritual enclosures. Each new, unseen structure adds another layer to our understanding. The discovery of a small, hidden building near a major burial mound, for instance, could be the shelter for a völva who performed her rites there, or a house for the living relatives who tended to the dead. Every hidden post hole is a clue pointing toward the precise rituals performed at these gates. Did processions walk a specific, ceremonial path from a temple to a riverbank? Were offerings placed at the exact point where a geophysical scan shows an anomaly in the soil? a spot the ancients might have considered a literal soft spot in the world. Ongoing excavations across Scandinavia continue to add pieces to this puzzle. With each summer dig season, new graves are unearthed, and with them, new questions. The arrangement of bones, the specific placement of a sword, or the residue found in a ceramic cup can tell us exactly how a community prepared one of their own for the journey into the earth. These are not just artifacts, they are frozen moments of ritual, the final physical instructions given to the dead for navigating the underworld. The landscape is still speaking, and we are only just beginning to understand its language. Long after the last pagan sacrifices at Uppsala, the old gods whispered in the winter winds. Across the farmsteads and fjords of Scandinavia, a rich tapestry of folklore preserved the memory of the underworld in a new guise. These were not the grand myths of Odin and Thor, but local stories passed from grandparent to child that kept the ancient map of the dead vividly alive. They remembered the Hogbui, the mound dweller. This was not a ghost, but the original Draugr by another name, a physically powerful being who remained inside its burial mound, fiercely protective of its grave goods. To disturb such a mound was to risk encountering a creature of immense strength and malevolence, one that could crush an intruder in its grip. The fear was so specific and so widespread that it confirms a profound cultural truth. The community never forgot that those man-made hills were active dwellings, and that the dead within were still present and still dangerous. Another, even more haunting figure was the Utpadur. This was the spirit of an infant who had been exposed to the elements, a tragic practice sometimes born of desperation in a harsh world. These tiny, sorrowful souls were said to linger near the places they were left, their cries echoing in the night. They were not inherently evil, but lost and pitiable, unable to find peace and forever trapped between the world of the living and the halls of hell. What do these stories tell us? They are a form of cultural memory, an oral history that outlasted the arrival of the new faith. The church could rename the holy days and build over the temples, but it could not erase the deep-seated understanding that certain places in the landscape were intrinsically tied to the dead. A farmer would point to a specific mound and tell a story about the Hogbui his own grandfather had nearly encountered, or a mother would warn her children away from a particular field where the sound of crying could be heard on a foggy evening. These legends served as a perpetual, unofficial warning system. They marked the map with invisible danger signs, ensuring that even generations later, people knew which stones were better left unturned and which hills were not merely hills but homes. The underworld had not vanished, it had simply retreated into story, its gates kept firmly shut by the one thing that truly endures fear. So the underworld was not a single destination, but a network of territories, each with its own physical doorway built into the Scandinavian landscape. Picture a map not of nations, but of spiritual access points. The wet, liminal bogs served as sacrificial mail slots, where gifts and lives were slipped directly into the mire for the gods below. The burial mounds were active neighborhood dwellings for the dead, their grassy slopes both a home and a potential exit for the vengeful Draugr. Grand mountains like Helgafell were literal apartment complexes for the honored ancestors, their stony sides opening into warm, lit halls. Deep caves were the most perilous gateways, leading straight into the primal darkness of Niflheim or the smithies of the dwarves. For travel between these realms, the Norse provided vehicles, the wooden ships buried in blue clay for the initial voyage, and the permanent stone ships acting as eternal ferries for the soul's journey within the afterlife. And at the center of it all stood the temple at Uppsala, a cosmic engine and spiritual capital where the golden chain to the gods was maintained by sacrifice, directly linking the power of Asgard to the silence of Helheim. This was a living, breathing geography. A farmer plowing his field knew the mound on the horizon was inhabited. A traveler crossing a misty bog felt the presence of the other side. The landscape itself was a constant, tangible reminder that the world of the dead was not a far-off myth, but a layered reality interwoven with their own, accessible through 100 different cracks in the earth. The Norse world was a single, interwoven reality where every forest, bog, and mountain held a potential doorway. Our journey across this ancient map reveals a landscape intentionally designed for passage, a network of sacred sites that formed a spiritual infrastructure connecting the living to the dead. These were not random places of superstition. Each location served a distinct and vital function in this cosmic geography. The bogs were sacrificial male slots, the mounds were active dwellings, the mountains were ancestral apartments, and the ships were eternal vessels. The temple at Uppsala acted as the central power station, regulating the flow of energy between all the realms. For the Vikings, this was not a matter of faith alone, but a practical understanding of how the universe operated. By building these gateways and performing these rituals, they were doing more than honoring their gods. They were attempting to chart the unchartable and navigate the ultimate human mystery. They sought to build a relationship with the darkness, to send gifts and messages, and to equip their loved ones for the journey ahead, all in an effort to exert some measure of control over the one certainty every person must face. Which of these gateways do you find the most compelling? Was it the silent stone ships, the royal mound at Oseberg, or the churning ritual center at Uppsala? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to join us on our next exploration into the world's greatest historical mysteries.